Howdy-o, what do you know? It is Rabbit of ScrubLeet Academy finally back again, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today I want to talk about the possibility of professions in Dungeons & Dragons Online. Now don't click away from the video just yet. Don't go. I know this isn't a popular topic, although the brand of resistance does leave a little bit to be desired. The only discussion thread I've been able to find on this front is right here, and if we're honest, the arguments against professions aren't all that good. For this thread, that seems to be every argument, but in this series we're going to be discussing the possibility of professions in the game and what they might look like with a bit of creativity. I'll leave a link to that thread in the description of this video if you want to check out the thread and get a finger on the barely alive pulse of this subject, but if you're not into descriptions, I'll just debunk all those arguments right now with one of my own. It would be fun? I think that's the word. Yeah, just a second here. Yes, here it is. Fun. Definition. What provides amusement or enjoyment? Second definition. Anything I can use for a YouTube video. This video will be fun for me and for you as well, because I have, as they say, all the right answers. One disclaimer, and the only argument I found on the forum that was any good, is that professions aren't quite the same in Caverns and Lizards as they are in other games. You are considered a professional of your class in this game. That is, you are a professional fighter, a professional cleric, a professional, alchemist too. These things are your job as much as your class, making them more identity-driven than in many other types of fantasy games. The counter to that argument is as follows. Professions, or as I'll call them secondary professions, are still goddamned fun. Hopefully that puts to rest the most ardent argument against including professions, and we can move along. But if you have some kind of cognitive dissonance about the subject, by all means drop a comment and boot that YouTube algorithm up. You might even change my mind. I mean, you won't, but you might. But you won't. For any good professions update, we need to make sure we have our materials in order. This video is going to cover all the changes I would make to the collectibles, gems, and new materials, and then we'll get into the actual professions in a future handful of videos. I just want to say, for the professions as I have come up with them, they are not as generic as tailoring, blacksmithing, fishing, cooking, mining, tinkering, potion making, or the best profession of all, others. You'll be able to do a lot of good stuff with these professions, and they're focused, but intriguing. Hopefully that's enough of a teaser to tide you guys over for a day or two before I get the next one in the series uploaded, and enough that people can start spinning some ideas themselves about what I have to say. Now, I want to start with the collectibles. I don't plan to use these for much, so they're probably pretty good just to leave as are in the Kenneth crafting profession. But bits and pieces could be adapted into my profession system as well. That said, if they are used in some capacity, they would need a bit of streamlining. They're not very well defined at the moment. First things first, every collectible will tell you its level bracket, its rarity, and some nice flavor text in its description. It's only polite after all. I like how they drop in-game at the moment, other than the fact that treasure bags don't seem to actually drop loot too often. But, you know, I kinda like how they work right now. So we're going to keep all of the nodes, all of the individual places that you can gather these materials from. And we may add a couple others here and there just to flesh out the new system. If the system is adopted and adapted, I'd give it a nice overhaul. Collectibles then would have to be broken into 8 different categories, not 4. The originals are arcane, cultural, lore, and religious. Now we have animal matter, artifacts, essences, fungi, literary matter, plant matter, religious iconography, and finally tools. First things first, we had to add a bundle of new collectibles to flesh out the roster. Essences got a massive overhaul, for example, and the same with religious stuff. Where there wasn't enough materials, I just made them up using some knowledge of lore and basic thematic guesswork. Names can always be changed. Second, there is only one material in each rarity in each level bracket. To be clearer, there is one common level 1 to 5 collectible, one uncommon level 1 to 5 collectible, and one rare level 1 to 5 collectible. This will be the same for each of the brackets up to the 36 to 40 bracket. This does get rid of the slight random discovery feeling of the old system, but with the amount of collectibles in the game in this new system, you would hardly notice that. Besides, it's easier to keep track of. Third, the collectible nodes like bookshelves and cabinets, as well as treasure bags if they ever start working again, are responsible for dropping specific collectibles as normal. Adventure packs and rubble can drop any kind provided the base level of the quest would drop that collectible anyway. The type of collectible drops may vary from the old system, but it'll still be logically consistent. Animal stuff and essences can be found on alchemy tables, for example. Every rarity from every level bracket drops from one source. There are 4 major sources, and they're far more logically consistent because it's all streamlined now. Finally, these are the values listed for these collectibles. Most vendors won't pay for them, but if you have the right profession, you can use collectibles as barter tools. There's a little sneak peek at one of the professions I have planned. There will be more on that later, but for now, that's it for the new collectibles. They don't need an overhaul per se, but they could have one. Gems are next. You should notice immediately that I've added a couple of categories, pearl and black gems. These are something of mirrors to each other, with pearl gems adding defensive, abjuration, or healing benefits, and black gems adding draining, debuff, or offensive benefits. That'll be more obvious when we move on to the Gem Twister profession later, but for now, notice I made the same changes to gems that exist in the collectibles brackets. Levels clearly defined for when you can get these gems with a single gem for each bracket. The only difference is that there is no uncommon or rare version of a gem's level bracket. Not necessary. There's enough of them there for our purposes, so I don't need to bloat the list. A lot of these are common gems currently in-game. If I could use assets already existing, I would, but occasionally I had to make some adjustments, which you'll notice in larger, bolded font. Sometimes a name was changed. Sometimes its level bracket. Sometimes a gem wasn't necessary anymore and just got removed. You'll notice that some of these gems are listed in the 36 to 40 bracket, but are findable in-game now. Easy fix, they just don't drop in those brackets anymore, and their only value will be as saleable items whose rarity is reduced to gray, basically trash tier. We'll just rename them to legacy gems, so there's no confusion. We're starting everyone off at the same level, so people who hoarded gems in the hopes that someone somewhere would drop professions into Dito all this time are going to be sour, and that will be funny to me. We naturally can't do the same with collectibles, since people are probably hoarding the ever-loving intercourse out of them, but hey, we gotta draw the line somewhere. I'm not giving a major pass to Caneth crafting, so that's fine in my books. Pretty much the main profession for these will be the Gem Twister, but others do find use for them as well. Soul gems, for example, are useful to the Factotum, another profession I have planned, and the Life Crafter. Basic gems could be helpful to the Designer, to Caneth crafters, and maybe a couple of others. Anyway, that's it for gems. So finally, the rest of the mats, the actual system I have innovated based upon my research. I will scroll through this list since these are all just base materials you'll need for the professions, but some of these you'll notice are super rare. Some require crafters to make them. You're not a smelter, you're not a blacksmith, that takes too much time. Some NPCs can do that stuff. The professions I'm putting forth are secondary professions, so we should probably keep things logically consistent for this made-up fantasy universe filled with fiction. I will mention something really interesting I found while attempting to create professions and credit where it's due, though it took me a long time to find this again. This is why you gotta go digging if you want to find gold. I took the idea of traits specifically from Hamburger here, but I made sure that we didn't grade them by trait value. Every item that has a trait has 100% of that trait. You can use an item with a trait or another item with the same trait, all the same pile in this system. I want this to be a much larger worldwide affair than just collectibles and gems, but it has to be more consistent for what adventurers would have the time for. This is going to be important stuff later, even for the lore. Mining operations are a huge deal in a Baron, particularly dragon shard mining. Though we're not going to be mining anything, we got dragons and liches and all manner of bitches to wreck. That stuff is still out there, and we can still get it. Oh, and yeah, here's the return of Kyber dragon shards. Neat, huh? Basically, to describe this system, you can use any item if a trait of that item exists in the recipe. Some items have a generic trait and some have a very specific one. In those cases, you have to use that specific item and that specific item alone. Sometimes there are items that are just those items and they have no traits. Cobalt doesn't have any listed traits, but that doesn't make it any less cobalt. Meanwhile, iron, for example, has the metallic base trait. It can be used as a metallic base for any item that allows for that, but also as iron for any recipe requiring iron. Basically, if something can be made of any metal type but doesn't necessarily require steel or iron or bronze specifically, it's good enough to use any of the metals that you can find as the foundation of that recipe. Wood has the arboreal trait, same deal, but some recipes can't use arboreal bases and some can't use metallic bases. Likewise, a metallic base can't be used in place of a metallic imbued or superior base, and vice versa. Most crafting windows will have a slot for applying a base when you select the item if that recipe has a base to begin with. Better yet, I'd have a drop-down menu that lists all the bases you could potentially have for that recipe and all the potential options you have based on the materials you possess. Like this chart, see? You could have all the bases listed in a drop-down menu, but if you lack the materials, then that base will be grayed out, while others for which you actually have the materials will show up in more pronounced text, like a yellow or purple or even white hue. One item of that material type will be used for the base, then an amount of material specific to the recipe, allowing you a bit more flexibility in crafting. Gem Twister, for example, uses gems as the base. For those recipes, gems will almost always be the base, so you'll find that those recipes are much more specific. Collectables are magical items that could potentially be used as materials in my system, but they will never count as bases for this purpose. The base is just the material you start with, and everything else is a component of the recipe. If a recipe requires a base and also another material, which they very frequently will, then you need to provide the base first, which will be the generic starter material, followed by the required specific material. For this, say, a silk bandage might require a sartorial base and also silk. That means you can provide any sartorial base as the foundation for the item, but you have to produce another piece of silk for the recipe itself. In short, either use 2 sums of silk or 1 sum of silk and another sartorial base. To make it simple, the base is flour, but you need more. Eggs, butter, baking powder, all that shit is still important. You don't have that, you don't have tasty-ass cookies. Simple as that. And yes, I get the irony of the silk example because flour mixed with flour makes more flour, but let's be real. Have you ever tried eating a handful of flour? How do you know that's not how cookies are made? Before you get any ideas, don't eat a handful of flour. It's probably not a good idea. Jesus would not approve. Back to the new materials. Yes, I don't have an actual name for these, but this is all hypothetical, remember? My proposal for how to get new materials, how to acquire them, is to allow them to potentially drop from specific collectibles, breakables, and chests, with a much higher drop rate from chests. Collectible nodes will always drop collectibles, but occasionally throw some mats in as well. Think of the chance of getting any new material to drop from a collectible as the same drop rate as common dragon shards, at best. Same goes for breakables, but a lot of stuff can drop from breakables. We might need to skew those numbers a bit there. Some items won't drop from chests, so there will be a dash through them, but most of the stuff you can get is possible to be hoarded by people who have treasure boxes. It's just linked to the role, so treasure hunters' elixirs will help you find more shit. Dito Store Opportunity SSG, don't let it go to waste, pay to win?
You had to pay to win.
Ooh, that's gonna get me some hate in the comments, but even so, it's still smart from a business standpoint. This is all presuming you find this stuff, but you're not making it yourself. Part of the veil about these professions is that they're things you can do on your downtime between adventures, not things you dedicate your professional life to. Adventuring is your primary profession. You find the stuff you need for your secondary professions using your primary profession. So if you're waiting for mining, well, that just isn't good for this system. That said, we have gathering professions to come. They're just more geared towards adventuring, not working a classic high Middle Ages trade in a world of magic where those kinds of trades wouldn't even be remotely close to how we imagine them anyway. I will have a link in the description to the entire list as well as every profession I come up with for this system at the time that I come up with it. But for now, we just have this list. There's not a whole lot more I need to go over regarding what's going to be involved in these professions, but if you want to pause the video at any point, that's all for the best. Check it out. It'll be fun, interesting, hopefully. If you want to use any of this stuff as a baseline to help you make your own tabletop professions, I could not give a shit. Just follow the link in the description. Go crazy, make this chart your bitch, and I am glad to have helped you out if that is the case. Like the other stuff, some of this is in the game at the moment. Some will have to be added, but there's surprisingly little that needs to be done in order to get this show on the road. It's a fun, easy system that should be just engaging enough that people have something else to do in Dito other than dungeon crawling, which I know is kind of the point to D&D, but not really the only thing that you should be able to do. In my opinion, and this might be a bit controversial, Update 58's Kill 10 Rats quest pretty much showed me that dungeon innovation isn't coming anytime soon anyway. So this might breathe some new life into the tired, formulaic old system of content creation that Dito finds itself suffering from at present. Kind of convenient that I'm using that as footage for this video. I get it, this video is probably not going to sit well with some people, but let's play the devil's advocate. I bet you'd enjoy the hell out of secondary professions, just like mounts, and the epic destinies, and the imbue system. History shows you're already accepting it. If it's done right, and we know it can be, you'll be the first ones on board. Still, who knows, maybe you'll just fucking hate it, and that's fine too, because you listened this long, so stick around, drop a comment, get that butt-fucking YouTube algorithm into 6th goddamn gear, and let's make this video reach 1,000 views. By the way, thank you so much for my first 1K video, too. I just wanted to give a celebration for my first 1K, as well as my first 100 subs, but I wasn't entirely sure how to go about it. So it took me until 162 subs. I can't just keep playing through Dungeon Siege after all, but maybe I could pick that up again just for the fun of it. Maybe this video series will be a cool enough treat and foray into my mechanical-ass mind, but I'll leave that for you all to figure out. That being said, I'ma get up out of here. I will have much more to say on this later, but for now, take care and have a great day.